This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Carrie Mercer and Stefan Bushman, who just increased their pledge amounts. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show. Hello, and welcome to episode 568 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the 2003 miniseries Frank Herbert's Children of Dune, a sequel to the 2000 miniseries Frank Herbert's Dune, which we discussed back in episode 515. This miniseries adapts the second and third Dune novels, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, which we discussed back in episodes 537 and 559, so definitely check those out if you missed them. And this will include spoilers for everything in Frank Herbert's Children of Dune, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 36th appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers' Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's been a television writer, producer, and script supervisor for shows such as Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Chew, and WWE's Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown. And she's currently a writer for Pixelberry Studios. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Good to be back, Dave.
The next up, we've got Matthew Kressel, making his 34th appearance on the show. His novel Queen of Static, the follow-up to his groundbreaking novel King of Shards, is available now. And he's also the author of the new book Dispatches from the Outer Deep, a guide to writing, editing, submitting, and publishing short and long fiction. Together with Ellen Datlow, he hosts the monthly Fantastic Fiction reading series in New York City. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Always excited to talk about Dune.
And also joining us today is Rajan Khanna, making his 25th appearance on the show. He's the author of the post-apocalyptic novels Falling Sky, Rising Tide, and Raining Fire. And his short fiction appears in magazines such as Analog, Lightspeed, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. His articles have appeared on Tor.com and LitReactor.com. So Raj, welcome to the show.
Happy to be back.
Okay, so let's start off with Andrea, and have you tell us about your history watching Frank Herbert's Children of Dune.
Well, I watched it when it first aired back in the 90s, and it pretty much held up to what I remember from then.
Okay, well, technically it was 2003, but close enough.
Okay, sorry. So almost just past the 90s. And it pretty much was exactly as I remember it, which was better than the original miniseries Dune. I remember, that it was both books and the acting was better. And it pretty much, held up to what I remember it being.
So when you say it was better than Frank Herbert's Dune,
the miniseries, the original, the first sci-fi miniseries of Dune.
If people haven't just listened to our panel on that, why don't you refresh our memory on...
It was terrible. That's pretty much that's pretty much it in a nutshell. It was god awful.
So does anything from Children of Dune from the miniseries stick out in your minds, like any of the actors?
James McAvoy was and is fantastic. He elevates every scene he's in, especially scenes with Els Krieg. They have such a better grade of acting and actors in this than the original one, and everything that pulls it down from the original is the original actors. The guy playing Paul, Chani's not so bad, but they put her in bad outfits. The guy playing Stilgar, he had some moments. Actually, he had a moment with Leto or Leto, however the frick you want to.
We're gonna go with Leto.
Okay,
they say Leto in the show, but I
know I always said Leto. So
Leto.
Good. All right, let's consensus. Where he's great. very understated, but everything else, like especially at the end, my good Lord, it's so over the top. But yeah, it's much, much, much better acting. Alice Krige is great. She's always great. Susan Sarandon's a little mustache twirling villainy to really be terrific. But yeah, I mean, that's really the biggest improvement is the acting. Much better caliber of actor in this show.
Yeah, so interesting. I just found out that Alice Krige, who you may remember as the Borg Queen from Star Trek First Contact, she was actually, John Harrison is the guy who wrote and directed the first one, and he wrote this one. He brought someone else on to direct it. But she was his first choice to play Lady Jessica the first time around, but she wasn't available.
Yeah.
And so the woman who played Jessica last time around, Saskia Reeves, she was pregnant when it came time to film this one, and Alice Krige was available for this one, so they kind of swapped her in. Yeah. So, but let's get Matt in here too. So, Matt, memories of watching this back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I remember when it came out, and I was pretty excited about it. I think if you recall from the last panel, I didn't hate the Frank Herbert's Dune miniseries as much as the others. I think it definitely had problems, but as I mentioned in the intro, I'm a sucker for everything Dune, and I still got into it. And maybe that was just momentum from loving the book so much that I was willing to overlook a lot of the first miniseries flaws. But this one, yeah, it really came together for me for the most part. I definitely had some issues with it. I thought overall the acting was really great. My least favorite actor in this is Susan Sarandon.
Bold choice given the
bold choice, because I think that she is a fantastic actor, and I've seen her in so many things where it's just she steals the show. Yeah. But in this, it was just
I think
every
did
time
she win
was
the
on
Oscar
stage,
a couple of years before this?
It's very very possible. But I just, when she was on screen, the mustache twirly thing, it just felt very like silly cosplay-ish, kind of like if you recall Star Trek Voyager when they were doing the old black and white serials on the holodeck. It was very like, it's like it was almost like she didn't take it seriously enough.
Yeah.
She was playing it for camp.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Dune is, as we've discussed before, is there's not a lot of humor in it, and it sort of, her scenes just felt out of place. I mean, some of that could have just been the particularly odd clothing choices that they had on some of this.
Yes.
And that may have just been due to budgetary constraints and whatnot, but
I thought the costumes were way better. They were way toned down from last time. They were distractingly ridiculous.
I mean, some of the sets, it was like, it took me back to kind of like, the BBC Doctor Who sets, like just cardboard and just a few props in the corner, and I was like, really? Okay. But I mean, I know we're going to get into it a little bit more, but I thought that, combining Dune Messiah and Children of Dune into one series was a wise choice. And it actually gave me hope for the next film, that they can actually do Messiah in an interesting way. Because I thought that they actually took what I thought is not such an interesting book and made it very interesting. But
they also smashed it into an hour and 20 minutes, which says a lot about Dune Messiah.
Yes.
All right.
They didn't really lose anything either.
No.
All right. Before we go too far, I want to get Raj in here too. So, Raj, any memories of this miniseries?
Yeah, I didn't see this one when it first aired. I saw the first one when it came out, and that was a big deal. And I had many discussions with my friend in college about, the comparisons between Lynch's movie and the miniseries, but somehow I missed this. or I just didn't care at the time, possibly. And I think only in retrospect did I realize that the actor who plays Leto was James McAvoy, who by that time was much better known. I think back then this was like one of the first big things he ever did. So I kind of went into this not knowing what to expect, or at least knowing to expect more along the lines of the original miniseries, which, I think it's not being mean to say that the effects are dated by today's standards, certainly, but I think it still has the same sort of emptiness, I guess, that the first miniseries has, which is, I think just how they used to get these things produced on such a low budget on green screen with these sort of CGI backdrops. But it just, to me, it feels empty. And I think it suffered just having, seen the two movies, the Dune movies that just came out, and how saturated and kind of rich the cinematography was with, real life locations and just so much on the screen. And then this felt like, it felt in some ways like a stage play where you had two actors and some minimal backdrop talking to each other. And the colors were very muted as well. So I didn't think that helped. But I agree that the performances were surprisingly, good with, and I also agree that Susan Sarandon, I couldn't take in this. I kept just wanting her to leave again on the and then there was just there's some characters that really popped, and some characters like, I forget who her son, what his name is again, but
Rajan.
Yeah, he especially at the end, like when he's like asking, "Oh, are we still going to get married?" I was just like, "Oh my god, he's just so pathetic, that guy."
Yeah,
I feel sorry for him. But but overall, I feel like I had a similar response to the original miniseries, which was they were really faithful, and I was amazed at how they packed those two books into 3, hour 20-minute parts. Yeah. But it felt like it lacked, like, I don't know, energy or excitement, or there was no spark to it except in certain moments here and there. So
yeah, well, let me say, so I'd never seen this before. I did not make it through the first Dune miniseries back when it came out, so I didn't watch the second. But I remember seeing ads for this all over the place on the Sci-Fi Channel. They were really pushing this at the time, and the first one was the biggest show still the Sci-Fi Channel ever had in history. And this was, I think, number 2 or 3. So like, at least in terms of, by the standards of the Sci-Fi Channel, these did quite well. But I am not a huge fan of them. I mean, I think the thing that you have to give John Harrison credit for in both of these is that he clearly loves Dune and knows Dune and has made faithful adaptations of them. And the thing that doesn't work for me is that he has not, in my opinion, paid sufficient attention to having them be dramatically, exciting to watch, or make any sense at all if you haven't read the books. Yeah. But I will pick up on the Susan Sarandon thing. I mean, I think that's a bold statement to say that she was the actor that bothered you the most in this, because even if she's a little campy in this, she is at least emoting, which at least 50% of the cast is just not emoting in any way that is at least perceptible to my senses. So I would say far and away my least favorite actor in this was the guy who plays Duncan Idaho. I found him absolutely unwatchable. But
he was just bland as opposed to like over the top. He was just boring.
Yeah, really boring. But so maybe, I don't know, maybe we could just go through the cast. So Andrea, who stands out as good?
James McAvoy, 100%. James McAvoy is fantastic. Like I mean, as I said before, he elevates every scene he's in. He makes the other actors better. And there's the scene where he's talking to Jessica. And that scene is great. And the girl playing Ghanima as well is also really good. Alia's not too, what? Jessica Brooks. Yeah.
Yes.
The woman playing Alia is reasonably good. I had a weird problem. This is just me, in that she was so tall. It sort of was visually disorienting to see her taller than literally everyone else in the cast. It was very strange. Stilgar still was not good. We talked about Susan Sarandon. Farad'n was dull. I think all the Eastern European actors they did their best, but.
Yeah, so this was filmed in Prague, like the last one. And so they had a bunch of Eastern European or European actors in it who, that was distracting to me, was that some of them were just obviously not native English speakers. And so it's like, why does Alia have a completely different apparent
accent.
Nationality than her parents and nieces and nephews and so on?
And she's like 6'5" or something. She's so tall.
But how about Matt? Any other comments about this cast?
I agree with most of those assessments. What Andrea said. James McAvoy, of course, was great. I loved his sister Jessica Brooks Ghanima. I thought Alia, the actress who played her, Daniela Amavia, I really liked her. I don't know if I was just kind of enamored by how pretty she was, but I think that I really felt her, because in the book there's that painful moment where all the voices in her head are sort of vying for control, and she just has this moment of helplessness, and I thought that in this show, when she calls out and she's like, "Help me, mommy," like I really felt that. It really hit me hard that she was just someone who's just, her mother. And I don't think they really gave that enough attention in this miniseries. The fact that, that we talked about, that Jessica basically left her alone for, 15 years.
Yeah.
And she didn't have any help to struggle with all of these voices in her head, and then became an abomination because of that. And so that I found very affecting. I didn't have a problem with Duncan Idaho. Maybe I just have a weakness for those like stoic figures. But I could see that others could find that to be a little off-putting. Alice Krieg, she was great. I mean, she's kind of a scene stealer as well. I like Julie Cox as Princess Irulan. I thought that, they didn't give her a whole lot to work with, but I felt that she did a very solid job with what she was given. Agree that
was interesting to me with Princess Irulan, because they had given her such a huge plot in the first one, which I assumed was because she was going to have a big role in this one and they wanted to introduce the character and set her up and everything. But then she has very little to do in this one, which in retrospect made it a little weird. They spent so much time on her in the previous one.
But it is very faithful to the book, though. She does not really have much to do in the book. She just, especially Dune Messiah,
No, for sure. I thought in the adaptation they were going to give her more to do.
Yeah. And Ian McNeice, who plays the Baron, when he like comes in, and he's such a force that it completely changes the tone of the scene. Like it's hard to explain, but I feel like I'm watching a completely different show when he, like, his ghost or his image appears to her, and then he's talking to her and telling her, and it's almost as if I'm not watching Dune. I know that sounds hard I'm not elaborating that well enough, but he was just so good at what he was doing that it almost took me away from the sort of mindset I was in watching Alia in the moment. But for the most part, I thought everyone did a fairly solid job, except for previously stated Susan Sarandon.
Okay, well, agree to disagree on that. But Raj,
I generally agree. I mean, I think all the people mentioned did a great job. Having watched this sort of in a very condensed fashion, or binge watch, I guess you could call it, I think it was clear to me that my attention would wander when certain people were talking on screen, and then certain people would come on and I'd be snapped back. Like, so Alia Leto, Ghanima, Jessica, those kind of people. I think the one person who wasn't mentioned who'd really disappointed me, and I think it was just a casting thing, was the Reverend Mother in the first episode, just because. But even the Lynch version, I mean, they have some really great actresses who just, to me, feel like these potent women, and she just seemed like she was, I don't know, somebody's mom or maybe like a bureaucrat or something in a weird way. And that's, I think the guy who plays the Baron, who was in the first miniseries, like, I think he's a good actor, but he doesn't have, to me, he comes off as more campy than having that undercurrent of menace that I think that, we've seen done better. And I thought it was interesting to be able to see the Alia stuff dramatized rather than just sort of read inside her head. But it was, maybe this is what you meant, Matt, but there were times where I just felt like it struck the wrong tone, like when she's hugging him and stuff, and it felt a little less sort of manipulative than I thought it would be. So
I really wished with the Baron that they hadn't had him as this like red ghost floating in the air, and they had just, he'd just been like sitting in the background like a normal, he looks like a normal person, but she's talking to him, and they didn't have any like weird, computer graphics or anything. And it's just understood that he's not really physically there, but it's not like, I thought.
Well, they definitely went over the top with all the vision stuff and whatever. It was a little bit too much. I mean, they were like, oh, look, let's do these flashy scenes in different locations. And I was like, oh, it just doesn't work. But it made me appreciate some of the choices in the Dune movies that just came out, because I think we talked about how, I thought maybe the visions would have more of a special effects component, and they don't. But now, having seen the opposite effect, maybe that was a good decision. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm certain that Villeneuve, and I know we've watched, you sent us that video of how to pronounce his name, and I'm still mangling it. I'm certain that he watched this series and the Lynch series many times, and like what worked, what didn't work. And I think that some of those visions, they're just like these flashes of things, and I'm not sure if they're adding anything at all. You're talking about like the sort of
like when in the beginning, when Leto appears to him to even before he's born, he's in the womb and he's talking to Paul, and then later on there's other visions that happen. I guess when he's getting force fed spice or Ollie, like
there's visions of like James McAvoy kind of like wandering around in this cavern system
in the Jacarutu. That's where he is. That's where
there
it is.
Was way too much of that.
But what I thought when I was watching it was, this looks like a 1980s MTV video. Like, that's how it was shot. I kept waiting for his flock of seagulls to show up.
I think and one more thing on James McAvoy, though. I think Andrea had said this ages ago on one of the other podcasts, but I do think it was, or maybe she said it offline, I don't know, but it was a smart decision, I think, to age up the two kids for a TV show like this. I mean, I know it takes away the creepiness of them being young and prescient, but for this, I think you need to have that sort of thing. So just to explain, they're like 9 years old in the book, and they're like 15 or something.
Supposedly 15 in this.
Well, they're also supposed to be very precocious as well, and but
there's a whole element of marrying her off to Frodden that you can't. It's too creepy to talk about marrying a 9-year-old child to what is he, like 18, 19 or something like that for him?
Right.
I don't know what he is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Something like that.
And doesn't Leto marry Ghanima in the book at the end?
No, but they talk about it. That's what the Bene Gesserits want to do, is mate Ghanima and Leto. And it's like, gross.
So, if you watch this now, after seeing the Denis Villeneuve and watching, the latest Marvel movie and TV show, the special effects look really dated, but these kind of effects were extremely common for TV shows in the late 90s and early aughts. I mean, look at like Buffy or Xena or any sort of like spec fic show of the time, and I think this type of stuff was
Yeah.
common. I mean, you go
Well,
back
as we
to
said last time, these were award-winning special effects at the time.
Right,
Like, they literally
right.
won Emmys for these special effects.
and you think about how far computing power has come in 20 years, and then you look at the wide shot and you see like the palace and all these people walking, and you have to take that in context.
I was thinking, like you were saying, that it's kind of like when we, in the 90s or the 80s, the 90s, looking back at those Ray Harryhausen movies.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was, people loved it at the time. And you look at it now and it's like, oh, that's adorable.
That's so cute.
Yeah, I love those.
Oh, I love those
animations.
movies. Yeah, absolutely.
I still think that stuff ages better than some of the 90s era CGI that it just looks ungainly these days, but that's my personal preference.
Yeah, and I didn't mind this like visually. Like the first one, this was a big step up in my opinion visually from the first one. It just had a better, like, it wasn't as wacky, like I said, with the costumes, and the special effects were like okay for what they were. The design of the worms was kind of cool with their like mouth within a mouth and stuff like that.
I wish
the running through the desert stuff was terrible.
Oh god,
though. That was really bad.
I was surprised by the worm. I was disappointed by how they didn't go far enough with the the second skin that Leto gets,
Right?
Because it was just like on his arm and like he's withstanding the sandstorm, and I'm like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense.
I agree.
And his running and everything, I'm like, at least make it sort of start there and then go a little bit. You can even leave his face open because I know they like to let us see the actor, but it just felt a little too easy.
You almost have to give credit to John Harrison for keeping that running through the desert thing in when it looks so bad.
Yeah,
because I'm sure like they did it and everyone was just like, this is horrible, and he's like, nope, it happens in the books, it's going in my show.
Well, one of the things you said, Raj, on the previous podcast about the book was that you felt, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but you felt that that's where it fell apart for you a little bit because it became sort of cheesy, became this like cheesy superhero.
Yeah.
And I can see it when you put it on screen here. I'm like, yeah, this is kind of dumb. This is just him running across the desert, and he's really just on a treadmill with the green screen behind him.
Well, it's also, I think, if I think back to what bugged me, it's just like it's just a lot all of a sudden. Like he puts it on his skin, and then he can like control the worms, and he can run real fast, and he can like basically like just kill people at will, and he has just so many different things he can do. I wouldn't have minded it as much, I think, if they built up to it. And in this, that is a cheesy scene, I agree, but they do tone it down a little bit. Like he doesn't really do much. We see him engage with the storm. We see him run, and then at the end, he kind of like kicks a lot of ass. But that didn't bother me as much because I felt it wasn't. It's just in the book that he talks about all the things, and it just feels like
I mean he like leaps off a cliff.
Yeah,
he's like leaping tall buildings in a single bound kind of stuff, and they didn't put that in there.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
No, I mean I like the performance. That was the effects weren't far enough, but I felt like everything kind of worked around it. How he was doing his thing.
But I think you have to respect. This attempt to be faithful to the books because, Lynch's film, I know some people hate it. I think all of us here liked it or love it. But it's not, it's different. Like it has a different ending, and it's not the book. It's got the book's like
skin
ideas in it and skin. Yeah. And it's got its weirdness. Lynch definitely captures its weirdness. But this miniseries and the previous one are much more faithful to the books, and I think you said, Andrea, that's not easy to do because there's so much in those books, and they're overall a faithful adaptation, and that I think is something to be lauded because, I think, we all know how complicated and complex the stories are.
Well, but I can admire John Harrison for like I said, for being faithful to the books, but I don't feel like this is a particularly good adaptation because he basically just stuffed in as much of the books as would fit without in my opinion, really any concern for whether it worked.
Well, I was just going to say, I agreed with you when you said earlier that if you haven't read the books, you kind of wouldn't know what was going on.
Yes.
And I think especially with the sand trout, like if you don't know what he's doing and why, like that, what does that mean? Like it's meaningless. It makes no sense. I don't think it's hard to say because we all know the books and the story so well, but I don't know that it would really make sense of him taking the sand trout and putting them on his body.
No, and I just, there's so many tertiary characters in the books who, like, I thought that there were too many in the books anyway, but there's way too many for a TV show of this length. Like when Tariq gets killed, it's like, who even knows who that is if they're just watching the TV show? Yeah. Like, just cut that out. Cut that whole character out, you know?
I think I said this when we talked about the first miniseries, but I mean, again, this came out and I had been watching Dune quite a bit. And so we talked about, I mean, like I said, I didn't see this one, but it's in the same vein, which was, these are way more faithful and like to a fault than what Lynch did. But I feel like in Lynch, everyone is going for it in that movie. Like everyone is like, you know, sometimes a little too much maybe, but like there's a lot of energy in that movie. And this just feel like it's faithful, but it feels flat a lot of the time, except when certain people, you know, liven it up through through their performance, I think. And I agree with you, David, that the weighting of what to include and what not, or what to just maybe touch on or condense or whatever, isn't quite right. And so the pacing seems off. That's why I think it felt slow in many parts, because the intrigue that you might experience in the book isn't getting translated by the characters talking on screen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like, you know, we talked about, you said Dune was at least exciting. The actors were going for it. It's like everyone in the Lynch movies was Susan Sarandon. Over a movie.
Yes. One of the things I think affected my enjoyment of this, and not in a good way, is the music.
Sorry. That 100%. It was terrible.
Yeah. So it sounded to me like a cross between like a graduation march and bad wedding music. It was like supposed to be this driving kind of, you know, momentous, like grand, I don't know what you want to call it, like grand sound. And it came off very cheesy and fake and just not appropriate to the tone of what we were watching. And, you know, I think a good soundtrack most of the time should be subconscious. Like you shouldn't necessarily notice that you're listening to it, but so many times it just took me right out of the story, and instead of enhancing it.
Yeah. I wrote down especially the beginning, I wrote down, this is like weird heroic martial music. It just doesn't fit. There's no menace. It's just like, we're supposed to be happy about this. We're supposed to be excited. It's like it's not supposed to be exciting. It's supposed to be menacing.
All right. So I want to ask Matt. So when we reviewed the book Dune Messiah, we were all had mixed feelings about it. There was a lot of feeling that it was slow, that nothing happens, for like the first 2/3 of the book.
Yeah.
But you said, right, that you thought that this made it more exciting, that first episode made that Dune Messiah story more exciting. So could you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things is that it shortened it. Like so I think part of my issue with Dune Messiah was that it seems that there's a lot of stuff just happening in boardrooms, that there's just a lot of talking. I do like the subplot in that book with the face dancer and, the little person that speaks in riddles, and Paul going blind after the stone burner. All that stuff is cool. And then, Paul basically going into the desert at the end. Those are all interesting plot points. And like, how Alia is trying to maintain power over this empire, and the religion of Muad'Dib is faltering, let's say. All that stuff is fascinating, but I think in the book it's weighed down by just so much dialogue happening but no actual action.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they made a smart decision in this to keep, if I recall, there was only really like one scene where they were discussing politics, around a table. But the rest sort of happened on the streets or wherever in the desert. And so I think it worked better. It worked as sort of a setup for the interesting things that are happening in Children of Dune.
I think it's definitely a good choice to make Dune Messiah the first act of a 3-act story, because then it's sort of inherent slowness.
And I just
doesn't bother you so much.
Yeah, and I just want to add that having seen it done, I would say reasonably well here, it gives me much more hope that Villeneuve is going to do the same, where, he is condensing that book and Children of Dune, and I believe
Is he
into
doing both?
No, I think it's just Dune Messiah.
He's calling it Dune Messiah, but so they're just doing that one book. They're not doing Children of Dune as well.
I don't think so.
My understanding, I could be wrong, but I think he's planning to make a Dune Part 3, which basically takes elements from Dune Messiah, but does not get into Leto and Ganima as teenagers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think he wanted to tell like the trilogy of Paul's story, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I don't know how well that book is going to work. As like a 2.5-hour epic thing. But if any director can pull it off, he can.
He's going to have to change it substantially,
he's gonna
or at least add to it and flesh it out substantially.
And then at some point, the movie universe is going to diverge significantly from the book universe.
Yeah.
And that's both good and bad. And I think, as you said, Dave, the director of this, they're so faithful to the book, but not necessarily faithful to narrative drive. And I think Villeneuve's strength is narrative drive. Like, holy cow, did the last Dune movie have narrative drive? And so if anyone can do that, I think he can.
Yeah. Well, like, for example, one thing they tried to do was to show the worm being kind of kidnapped and taken off world.
Yeah.
Like, that scene doesn't appear in the book. It's just like somebody mentions that happened in passing. So it's, I think, like, stuff like that, they're going to have some reason to have big, like, worms and battles and stuff, which is sort of happening in this world. This whole, jihad and everything is going on, but, it doesn't appear on stage in the book, but I think they're going to have to find some way to make it appear on stage in the movie.
I think that was the main criticism of the book, is that almost everything happens off stage. Mm-hmm. Even Chani's death. I was happy at least that they gave her a death scene here. He doesn't just walk in and she's dead. Sorry. They let her die.
Paul was in a meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I went back and listened to our earlier discussion, and I forget who said it, but there was what I thought was a brilliant suggestion, which is that Duncan should just be the point of view character for the Dune Messiah events. Like, he's the one who has an arc. He's the one who has conflict. Like, Paul should not be our window into the story. It should be Duncan's, journey through the story that we're tracking and that we care about.
The problem that I felt with Paul's character in the book is that he's just walking around like Hamlet, just bemoaning everything. And when I watched this, they at least got rid of most of that, like, navel gazing of him walking around going, I can't, there's nothing I can do about it. It's all going to happen anyway. So I'm just going to follow the path I see and not doing any, he doesn't make any choice. He doesn't do anything because he knows what the future is, and he just doesn't try to fight it, which is depressing and is uninteresting in a character, in a main character.
I want to get Raj back in here. Raj, what do you think about this as a model for a Dune Messiah?
I mean, I do think I agree with Matt. I feel like I'm more optimistic about it, but I'm interested to see how, like, if he wants to take it in a different direction, or at least not different direction, but emphasize certain threads about, he seems to be Denis. I won't even attempt the last name right now, but he seems to be concerned with Paul's rise and then fall, which has been set up by the second movie. So I think that, focusing on that, I think it could be kind of interesting. I mean, I think I liked Dune Messiah better than the rest of you by a smidge, but I do agree that it doesn't. There's no clear roadmap for like, oh, exciting movie. Yeah. But if he delves more into the relationship between Chani and Paul, which isn't really covered too closely, but at the end of the second movie, obviously we have this big rift that's been formed. That would be interesting. But also, I mean, this is not related to your question, so I'm just going to throw this out there. But maybe it's because of the way I watched this miniseries, but I felt like it was not quite as damning of Paul, although Leto does basically point out that he didn't go far enough, or there were things he didn't finish, and that's what his job is. But I didn't feel like it was damning of Jessica really at all. And that was something we came out of the book thinking like, oh wow, she comes off in such a different light in this book. And in this one, I felt like they were like, oh, we love Jessica, and she almost seems like the good guy in the end. Ali is the bad guy and she's the good guy, and she wins. And that felt off to me, having recently discussed the book itself. So whereas I think the movies are gonna definitely be damning on lots of people.
So he set that up in the last. Denny set that up, that Jessica is the bad guy. They did address it here, where Alia says, "You left me to deal with this myself," and Jessica also says, "I ran. I was a coward." So they do address it, but she is still treated like a hero in this, as a good guy in this, and she is not.
And they did change the ending where she, instead of jumping out the window, they give her the Chris knife.
Yeah, well, actually, they changed the endings of both of them because, not to the same degree in episode 1, but in the book, Paul throws a knife to kill Skytail, right?
Yeah.
And in this one, he kind of like sneaks up behind him, or sort of, whatever you would say.
Yeah.
Sweeps up behind him with his powers and cuts his throat or something. So I guess maybe because there's that scene where Alia is training. So in the book, Alia is training in the nude with this like some sort of dummy. I had them, at least in my memory, it's some sort of like practice dummy thing. Yeah. And then Paul comes in and throws a knife to deactivate it. And so in this, they changed it to these sort of like spinning blades that fly around, like robot, drone blade kind of things. And then I forget, somehow he does deactivate them somehow, but it's not by throwing a knife, or now I forget what actually.
I think he does throw a knife into the thing that operates them, that's on the wall.
Okay.
Actually, that was the scene where I was like, oh, I kind of like this Alia, because I think she played that really well, where she's naked and just kind of prancing around and excited about taking, 11 blades this time or whatever, or I forget the number. And he's just clearly like, put some clothes on, don't risk yourself. But she resists that so well I think that's why I ended up liking.
Well, it was super weird though, because in the book she's training nude, which like whatever, but in this she's training fully clothed, and then once he deactivates the things, then she strips down. What?
She was hot. She, it was a sweaty room, and
I remember that scene very well, watching it 20 years ago, and I thought it was well done. But the clothes thing was just weird. It's weird in the book too.
No, it is, but it's like, if you're gonna like, it's one thing if she's training nude and then people walk in. I mean, that's like a little weird, but it's even weirder if she's not training nude and then strips down once they come into the room. Like, I don't know why they
part of that is
doing that at all.
Probably because this was Sci-Fi Channel and it had to be, rated PG or whatever.
Yeah.
So they couldn't have a nude scene, but they needed to infer that she was, again, they were probably referencing the book, trying to go as close
too
as
much,
possible,
right? Though that's where you just say, never mind, she doesn't take her clothes off.
Yeah, they don't need it. It doesn't add anything to it other than she's a little nutty. But
but I will concur with Matt that the actress was very attractive.
I cannot dissent with that opinion. So.
I agree too. I agree she's very, very attractive.
Can we talk about the accents?
Oh, God.
Sure.
You sound reluctant.
Well, no, I mean, I already mentioned that her accent bugged me, but do you have other stuff you want to say?
Well, it just sort of, that some people have English accents, some people have American accents. There's like no consistency among them, and even among the Fremen, and sometimes when you watch these science fiction shows or films, and you see people with different accents. Oh, okay, they're from a different planet or different whatever. But what I liked in Denis' film, where like Javier Bardem had the accent, like, oh, you didn't recognize his accent is from the South.
Yeah.
Like they actually put it into the story, and I was kind of hoping they would have done that a little bit better here. And after a while, I just got used to it and didn't notice it anymore. But like. Alia has a weird accent and Paul doesn't. I mean, I shouldn't say weird. I should just say it's not Paul's accent, and it.
But I think she's trying to approximate an American accent, but you can hear every once in a while something slips, and it's just like, yeah, you're not an American at all.
I was playing Guess the Accent, so I'm like, I think that guy's Irish, and I think that guy is Dutch, and yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think you can sometimes get away with that and you don't really notice as much, or you just kind of accept it because you're just caught up in what the story is being told to you. But in this, it did bother me too. Like I was like, oh, why don't they, nobody sounded like anyone else. I mean, and I'm somebody, like I was going to say, like the movies do have that problem in some respects. Most of the Atreides people all speak with an American accent, but there's a lot of colloquial American talk in those movies, which I'm not a huge fan of, but like you said, they at least made an effort to explain that piece at least. So.
Well, it's funny. When I was watching this and thinking about the accents and how it's all over the place, I was remembering when we were talking about the Denis movie. I'm not going to say whatever his last name is, because I don't want to screw it up. But, and I was thinking about how, was it you, Raj, who talked about the accents and how, or maybe it was Matt who said, that they didn't like Chani's accent, or at least she felt like a teenager or she was out of place. And the more I thought about it, I was like, I kind of agree about that, because all of her friends and everyone else in Siege Tabor has an accent. She has an American teenager accent. She's the only one who has that accent. So that, in retrospect, is the one criticism I have of that movie, is that her accent is not like her best friend has a Middle Eastern accent, and all the rest of the people in Siege Tabor have Middle Eastern accents.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a choice for when they're making a movie to be like, do you want to the actor to be thinking about getting their dialect right or just giving their good performance? And so I understand it. And I think, I think all of the actors in that movie did a great job, but it's just, I don't know. Again, I'll always put the caveat in that I've had these books in my head for such a long time that, little things jump out at me that I've come to expect or think of as part of the world. But I do think that there is a formality that is somewhat lacking in the movies, just in terms of the way that they speak. But again, I think that probably wasn't a focus for the filmmakers. But yeah, go ahead.
I don't usually care about accents. Like, people will complain like, oh, this character had a Cornish accent and like whatever. I mean, I have no idea. But I mean, but this one, like the Alia accent was like so obviously foreign compared to her family members that it did distract me. And I agree with you, Raj. Like for me in the Villeneuve, the Dune Part 2, that the fact it's not even like, it wouldn't matter so much who had what accent, but just the fact that Paul and Chani obviously have the same exact accent, same exact culture, same exact, sort of colloquial way of talking to each other. That does seem sort of odd to me. It strikes the wrong note to me, because they're from like completely alien planets and
right. Like if they had been from two, like Caladan and wherever House Carino is based, I can't remember.
Secundus.
Is that where they live? I thought that was where the Sardaukar were. I thought that was the prison planet.
That's
But anyway,
well,
maybe
that's where they were here. That's where
yeah.
their evil castle on a rock was.
But if, like they were corresponding via the Dune version of email, I can imagine that they would grow up with the same touchstones being part of these noble houses. But, then you have the Fremen who are very starkly divided just from the beginning and the way it's set up and how they work and everything like that. But it's fine. But yeah, I do appreciate though, like, I'm thinking to Game of Thrones, if that's not a dirty word to bring up, but like they were very careful about making sure that like all of the people in the North spoke with Northern British accents. Like it was pretty spot on. And like even people who didn't speak like that and had different British accents in real life would speak like that. And I thought that helps. It's just a little piece of world building and consistency that I think helps ground you in, the difference. Because then when you go south and you see somebody who speaks with a different accent, whether you're conscious of it or not, you can feel that difference there. Whereas with this, I mean, again, I guess you can get away with it. It's space. It's the far future. Like there must be tons of different accents everywhere. Like, people are isolated on different planets, but yeah.
Okay, so apparently the native planet for House Carino is Catane.
Yeah.
And then they were exiled to Seleucus Secundus.
Which is the prison planet, I believe,
yeah,
with the Sardaukar train, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, but let's get into more into episodes 2 and 3. So, I don't know. How did people think that those episodes compared to the first? Did people feel like it got better as it went along, or
it felt to me very much like it got better as it went along. I stopped taking notes and just started actually watching because I was engaged because things happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first one felt like a prequel to episodes 2 and 3, which was the real story that they wanted to tell.
Yeah.
And
it was like a prologue.
Yeah. And once you get Leto on screen and it's James McAvoy, I feel like you're like, oh, that's the main character that I'm supposed to focus on, clearly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I mean, we said it already, but James McAvoy is carrying this production like he's a giant sandworm with riding on his back.
With hooks jagged into his side, yeah.
Yeah, I mean he's just he's on a whole other level than the rest of this cast in my opinion. So if they had just an average actor in that role, this would be unwatchable in my opinion, and he just makes it watchable just through his sheer
talent,
screen presence. Yeah.
But just his, not even, screen presence, but his talent, his ability. He doesn't do anything over the top. There's subtlety in everything he does, in the way he speaks, the way he delivers the lines, even just his facial expressions. He's a real actor as opposed to almost everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like a lot of these people were stage actors and would have been, okay on the stage, but not in front of the camera.
I might have said this when we talked about the first miniseries, the Dune miniseries, but I will never forget my impression when I watched that back in the 90s was it's like they got every Eastern European stage actor, dinner theater actor to be supporting actors in this. It's like they're just like the worst Eastern European actors. I'm so sorry. I feel that's a terrible thing to say, but they're just all really bad.
Yeah. No lies detected. But okay, so actually one little change they made right at the beginning, I think right at the beginning of episode 2 that I thought was actually really good was we see, I don't know if it's Otham, I forget exactly which character it is, but we see his son dying or at least being maimed by some sort of stone burner type weapon, which I thought did a good job of establishing that character who we see very little of in the story, and also establishing that these. No, sorry, wait, no, sorry. This must have been the beginning of episode 1.
This is the beginning of episode 1, yeah.
Okay, I take that back. But I thought that was good that they set up the stone burner before, because otherwise it kind of comes out of nowhere in the book.
I also, did anybody notice how they dressed them like Templars in sacking Jerusalem? That's what that first scene looked like. They were dressed like Templars with those outfits, and it was not subtle.
Well, they probably had a bunch of Templar costumes. That's like an ice when we reviewed Ice Pirates. That they just had all this chainmail and stuff from central casting. So why not put it in space? But so yes, okay. But focusing on what happened in episodes 2 and 3. Now it's all kind of running together in my mind. But so. I remember the tiger, the laws of tigers.
Yeah, I think it starts with Jessica coming to visit, right? Like, isn't that
isn't it Leto and Ganema talking?
Yeah, and then Jessica comes to visit, and then it throws everything into turmoil.
But to answer my own question, I did feel like it got better as it went along.
Yeah.
I feel like the person who designed that CGI butterfly was like, it has to be in every scene. Like they used it anytime they were in the desert, with the exception of one time they had a scorpion. But it was like, nope, there it is again. We blew our whole budget on the butterfly.
Okay, so the Lhasa tiger attack, I had the distinct sense, the way I remembered in the book was that Leto had basically knew what was going to happen and had planned all this in order to kill the tigers and
to disappear.
And that did not come through to me at all.
They left that out. That was very obvious to me that they left it out, because Ganema also, they put this like mind trigger where she actually thinks that he's dead, and then when she sees him, she's supposed to remember everything, that their plan that he was going to disappear, but they had her actually think that he was dead.
I think that's fine to cut. I mean, to me, it didn't seem like that big a deal, although obviously it's very different from the book. Yeah. Oh, can I just bring up something that I've just remembered, but the whole time I was like, oh my God, I have to mention that, like Guild Navigator.
Oh, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I get it. They're supposed to be mutated and whatever, but it was, that one was a little off target for me. I mean, I prefer the one in the Lynch movie, that huge, like crazy looking thing. This, it was almost like it came in from a different movie, and they're like, oh, let's pull this creature in. He's like sort of amphibian.
He's like a cute little fish thing.
Fish fairy.
It's like Mario 64 character is what it looked like to me.
Yeah.
Did anybody I felt like a lot of this graphics were very early, or at least mid computer generated, like video game kind of looking stuff. Like there's this one shot where I think it's in the first episode, where Jessica's walking through this place in Caladan, and there's water on either side, and the water looked exactly like water in a video game.
Yeah, that whole scene, it reminded me of that video game Myst, if you remember that. MYST. Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's just a product of the technology at the time, and probably the limited budget that they had to do this.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like it probably looked good at the time. It's hard to look back 20 years and go,
Yeah, I mean, I think there was like different tiers of special effects, and I think you had the stuff in the movies which looked smoother and more fluid, and the stuff that you would see often on these TV shows was more like geometric in design and sort of blocky. But yeah,
I don't think it looks good at this. I mean, you compare this to Star Wars or something, it looks Star Wars 1977, it just looks a million times better. I think this is just like, we can get sci-fi imagery on the screen,
but I feel like
at a budget, low budget.
Doing water and doing space scenes is such a different thing.
Yeah.
But I think also computer graphics, as opposed to, they did models it was all practical. It was models as opposed to graphics and computer generated.
Yeah.
But there were lots of shows in the late 90s, early 2000s that were made by non-US production companies, I believe. Some of them were in Canada, some of them were other places, where it would just be mostly this level CGI and some, actors. Like I think Lex was one of them. And then there was like a couple others, often very short lived, but it was this level of special effects. And I think it, is just that for those budgets, they weren't Hollywood productions. They weren't.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think anyone ever looked at it and said, oh, this looks great. It was just, we can put a spaceship on the screen for like 1/50th of the cost of building a model. So
that's what I was just going to say.
But the ships didn't look bad. The ships didn't look bad. The ornithopters didn't look bad. I think it's just things very specific, like water looked terrible. And the green screens were better than the first one, but still not great.
I think the ornithopters are the one thing that I always enjoy in every single version of Dune that I've read or watched. So that's cool.
But I agree with whoever said that Paul comes across as way more sympathetic in this than in the book or in the Villeneuve films. Like the scene where, there's this key scene where Leto and Paul are talking, and in the book, it's way more contentious. Whereas here, I guess Leto does criticize him to some degree, but it felt way more like he was receiving wisdom from a, beloved elder than it came across to me.
Actually, it felt to me like he was forgiving him. It was a forgiving sort of conversation, as opposed to he's accusing him in the book.
I did appreciate that they dumbed it down in just because like Paul's talking in riddles the whole time in the books, and I went through that once, and now I'm like, just tell me what he means, and that's pretty much what they did, and so that made it easier. But I feel like they let those certain characters off easy in this version.
Yeah, it may just be that John Harrison is such a huge Dune fan and just loves these characters so much. He wants to treat them kindly.
And there are those people who think Paul is always a hero. So
yeah,
who are these people? But I guess do you know, David, why they didn't make any more? Is it just they ran out of money? Because apparently it was a success, or did they just not feel like they wanted to tackle the other books, which I still haven't read
there were
yet.
a couple. I think one thing is that I don't think any of us have, or maybe some of us have read it, but God Emperor of Dune is apparently even more
weird,
difficult to adapt to, a visual medium than even these ones are. So I think that was part of it. I think that the company, like the production company, got bought up by some other entity. Yeah. I think that had something to do with it. And then also the same year, the Sci-Fi Channel released the Ron Moore Battlestar Galactica, which was a huge smash. And I think that it did not really make sense for them to devote more resources to another Dune miniseries when they had that thing going.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also hard to do God Emperor is because all the characters are pretty much gone. It's just Leto, right? And also I think what's his name? Duncan shows up in like the 34th iteration of him. Is that correct? It's been a really long time since I've read Dune, God Emperor.
I haven't read it, but it's 10,000 years later. So
yeah, so everybody, all the people you know are pretty much gone. So it's hard to bring people back to something where the characters they're attached to are gone.
Yeah. I guess that's one of the reasons also to stick to these, because you can follow that thread of Gurney and Jessica and all of those characters from the beginning.
All right, cool. Any other thoughts on this miniseries that we haven't any random things people wanted to bring up?
Well, why is Jessica wearing furs when she arrives on Arrakis? That's just weird. But the thing that the costumes are kind of terrible. But the thing that really struck me is that it's like the effects got worse as you went along. Like the riding the worm looked terrible. And I know this is because we're coming from the Villeneuve version, which Villeneuve, which looked amazing, which was incredibly emotionally powerful, visually powerful. So I'm watching this and I'm like, holy crap, that's terrible. It's like, did they even buy a wind machine so you could see their hair? Like, come on.
Right. Yeah.
And then, Stilgar riding towards Arakeen, on the, the army of worms, comparing it to the end of the last Dune movie. It's just like, it's really hard to look at because it was just done so perfectly. But that's a retrospect kind of thing because...
Yeah, I did not honestly notice that the special effects got worse as they went along, but if that's the case, I would imagine the explanation is that they did them in order and just were kind of like cutting corners.
Ran out of money.
The end to ran out of money. By a deadline.
Yeah.
Any other random thoughts?
There was one outfit that Alia wore that looked like she was going to like brunch or something. I don't know.
It was like
it
with
was
it was like it looked
yeah.
like literally like slacks and a top,
And
like a
a
top with
bustier
no
top. They
shoulder.
kept putting her in a bustier top. Like, why is she?
And I was
doing
like, wait, she's queen of a galaxy spanning empire. Okay. I mean, no,
I didn't mind so
overall-
much because she was very attractive. I don't know.
that?
I do have a
What
question.
are you talking about, Dave? I didn't notice.
I have a
They
question.
also in the last one, in the episode 3, they just got him a pirate at one point. She's wearing like a pirate hat. I was looking for the parrot. It was so awful.
That's pretty funny. I watched it on YouTube, and I missed just little parts because when they were doing their hand signs, the captions were in French, and I don't speak French, so I didn't have. I liked that idea that they were doing that, and you could read. I think they did that in the movie as well. But every time they did that, I was like, oh well, I guess I don't know what's going on here, and I couldn't remember. I mean, I'm sure I have the gist from reading the book, but it was just funny because I also had the auto captions on as well, so it was a little ridiculous.
So I
No,
remember
that was really cool
Yeah.
how they did that,
Yeah,
where
it
they're
was.
having a conversation, but they know that they're being eavesdropped on, so they're communicating by sign language at the same time that they're speaking.
Yeah.
Speaking out loud.
It's very cool. And I was reading that the person, and I'm forgetting their name, who created the language for the films, also created a sign language. And
For the Villeneuve films you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's David Peterson.
Yeah, I definitely don't. Yes, yeah, I definitely don't think that they were doing that here. But yeah, I love that whole idea, and I'm definitely excited about the Dune Prophecy show.
Yes. Oh yeah.
The trailer looks good.
It has a
I
great
really-
cast. Like that cast is amazing. Mark Strong.
Yes.
The
I
woman
just
who's
really
playing
hope.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just really hope it's well written. We'll see.
Yeah, that was really nice of them to release the trailer today so that we could talk about it.
I didn't
Exactly.
see it yet because I was trying to finish the miniseries, but I have it to look. I did see that it came out everywhere.
It looks way better than I was expecting. I mean, it has the same visual aesthetic as the films, where I guess I was expecting it to look more like a TV show, but it looks like the shots could come out of the films. So I was pretty impressed.
And remind me again who the showrunner is for that.
I'm actually not sure. It's changed a couple times.
What is it called? The Prophecy or something? Dune.
It's
the
now
Prophecy?
called
Dune
Prophecy. I
the
like
Prophecy.
Sisterhood better. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Prophecy means nothing. Sisterhood means.
Maybe they thought all the misogynists out there wouldn't want to see it if it was called the Sisterhood.
Yeah, that's logical.
What was I going to say? Is Denis involved in this at all, like a producer or anything, or is it just completely independent of the movies?
Well, originally he was a producer and he was going to direct like the first episode or something. I'm not sure. I think he might have had to step away just because of time commitments.
Okay.
Right now it says Alison Shopke is serving as showrunner. Serving as showrunner,
Sounds
writer,
lame.
and executive
And
What else has
producer.
she done?
She's well known for her work on the ABC espionage series Alias, the Fox science fiction series Fringe, and the Netflix science fiction series Altered Carbon.
I like those
Okay.
things.
Yeah.
It looks like Kevin J. Anderson is also a co-producer on it because I guess they're pulling from the
Yeah.
books that he wrote with Brian
Yes.
Herbert. So, okay.
Did you notice that Brian?
It's Alison Shapker, not Shapke.
Did you notice that Brian Herbert was a consultant on this too?
No,
In the
but I
credits,
guess
his name
that
is in the
makes
credits.
Sense. They probably, need to have help, like how
Yeah.
things are connected or whatever. Maybe I don't know. I just hope in
Probably
this.
Before Dunepedia appeared on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And also probably it's a contractual thing to get the
Oh, yeah.
rights.
maybe.
Yeah,
What was I going to say? Oh, I hope in this show, because I get that in the films they cut out a lot of the background stuff, the mentats, the what the Sook doctors do, and the different organizations. They didn't quite go into those in any detail. I'm hoping that we get to see more of that in the TV show where they have more space to kind of let that happen.
You know what I did miss? Duncan didn't have the metal eyes.
Oh yeah.
Yes, I noticed that.
to Talaxu eyes. I was waiting for that. And
He just had like
Gray
dead
eyes.
human eyes.
They just cast an actor with the most lifeless eyes they could
I mean,
find.
I thought that guy, like, I've seen that guy in other things, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
he's a handsome guy, so I get it. They're trying to put him there, but he didn't have the spirit of Duncan Idaho. But then again, I
Yeah.
don't know that nothing against him, but I don't know that what's his name is also my choice for Duncan Idaho. I don't think they've ever. So I like the
Jason
ornithopter.
Momoa.
Yeah, I like the ornithopters and everything. I think I've never seen them get Duncan Idaho right for my money. Like,
Really?
not in the Lynch one, not in Momoa, not this guy. So
See,
yeah.
I loved Momoa. I thought he was perfect.
He just feels like a different version of that character for me. Like, I feel like Duncan is a little less broy in my head, but that's okay. Again, I wasn't given money to make a Dune movie.
Yeah,
so
I'm all about Momoa. I think
Yeah.
they should make him the viewpoint character for part 3. I think
I love-
that would work.
I
really
love
well.
Gurney in those movies, but yeah.
Oh yeah.
I didn't care for Gurney in this one so much, but
No, he was very boring.
yes.
He looked like a high school principal.
Odd trivia that the guy who played Duncan Idaho, I think he's European, but he came to Hollywood because he was dating Salma Hayek,
Oh, wow.
but has since gone into, he's like a high-powered businessman now.
Really?
I've seen him in other things.
Yeah, I have too, but I don't know what.
recognize him from something.
I have to look it up now.
Do you have IMDb open, Dave?
I do.
I can bring up his Wikipedia page. No, this says he hasn't been in anything since 2003.
Before that?
Edward
Nothing?
Atherton.
Before that, he was in The Man in the Iron Mask,
I've seen that. Yeah.
The Mist of Avalon,
Seen that
Alias, Firefly.
Oh, Alias. I'm
Firefly.
sure I know
Firefly?
him from Alias. Oh, he's Atherton Wing. Yes, of course. He's the rich guy who Inara goes down to the planet for that cotillion, and do you guys remember that? Well, I don't know if you know Firefly, but I remember who he is now. That's how I know him. Atherton Wing from one episode of Firefly.
One episode. Wow, you remember a guy from one episode?
I mean, I've seen that show so many times.
Oh, okay.
I love that show.
I mean, that's interesting that his name is Edward Atherton and they named his character Atherton.
Yeah.
Wing, so
But he's good at playing like a kind of rich asshole too. So yeah. But I think I said in the book, Duncan was, at least for the Children of Dune book, Duncan was one of my favorite characters, and I just felt his sort of emo pathos going on. And they went through all the scenes with this guy, but it just didn't feel like, and especially compared to Alia's energy, his energy was like way lower down, and she was just kind of dominating those scenes. So
yeah, I felt the same thing, because I remember those two scenes with him, the two of them are heartbreaking. And here it was just like, you're going through the motions.
I'm now imagining, it just occurred to me for the first time, Jason Momoa with Anna Taylor-Joy in the future.
Yeah.
Like, that's a weird thought. But I guess they're not doing that movie, right? So it doesn't
Which
matter.
breaks my heart. The more I watch this, the more I remember what a better story Children of Dune is. I want to see Villeneuve's version of it. I really want to see it, because I think he could do amazing things with it. And
But so does Duncan come back in
Children?
I thought he came back.
No, I'm
for
sorry.
No,
that's right. He's
no.
in Messiah. That's correct.
Yeah, so he will be in that. So they can always pull a few things forward in that. Like, I mean, they do get together in Dune Messiah, right? So
at the
I
end,
guess,
just very much at the end, though.
Yeah.
I was actually wondering if they were going to bring the fact that Anya Taylor-Joy has her mind like haunted by the Baron, if they're going to bring that forward into Dune Messiah. I mean, that seems like it would.
Yeah,
it would work really well, especially since they already set up very early on about the family connection. So I think that would be good. Like, I think,
but it's
good.
I was just going to say it's hard because we didn't see her as young Alia, and we don't get that contrast between young Alia and then her going crazy.
Although
it's heartbreaking.
They basically stole the trick from this miniseries in the sense that we see Leto as an adult before he's even born through the vision with Paul, and that's what they did with Alia in the second movie. So that's kind of interesting.
Speaking of stealing scenes, like the end of the first episode where Alia kills everyone when Paul and Chani leave, I was like, that's the end of Godfather 2. Like 100% the end of Godfather 2. I was like, I'd salute you for that. If you're going to steal from anybody, steal from the Godfather.
But not literally, because they will kill you.
Correct.
I just hope that James McAvoy shows up somewhere, because
that would be great.
That man can do no wrong.
No.
As far as I'm concerned.
No, God bless him for being in this.
All right, so we're pretty much out of time, so why don't we start wrapping this up? So, Matt, final thoughts on this whole experience of watching Children of Dune miniseries?
I'm glad I did. It's definitely an experience watching this miniseries after having seen the latest film. Certainly, we've come a long way in terms of special effects. But I love the story. I mean, I'm a sucker for the Dune stories, and even with some of the flaws in the acting and the special effects and the sets, I was still able to be engrossed by it enough where, by the second episode, I was just swept through. I had almost zero notes until after the episode was finished, and I was like, "Oh, right." I enjoyed it. Does it have its flaws? Yeah, but I still think that it's a faithful adaptation to the books. And I almost wonder, I mean, at some point, I think someone probably would have adapted Dune again if these hadn't been made. But I feel as if the success of this may have helped some. So I recommend watching it if you're a Dune fan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I listened to another podcast about this, and they said that this was before, like at the point they were talking, Villeneuve was like just in talks to come on board. But they were saying that John Harrison owns the rights, or most of the rights, or something, to Dune. So
to Dune or Children of Dune?
I think, I'm not sure actually. I mean, somehow like the Villeneuve films came about as part of a chain of events that involved him having the film rights or TV rights or whatever. So it's like, so these did lead in a really direct way, it seems, at least from what I know, to the Villeneuve films. So that's definitely. And he's a producer. I think we mentioned at one point he's a producer or something on the Villeneuve films. So, like, whatever you think of these, they did serve as an important stepping stone, it seems, to the Villeneuve films.
Yeah.
But so, Raj, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I finally got to see it, because I've known that it's existed for a long time, and I have never had the chance to watch it. For me, it was a nice kind of reminder of the last two books that we read for this podcast, because my memory is so bad that it was like, oh, right, this scene. I watched them very quickly. So it probably wasn't my best retention in terms of like getting every single detail, but it was amazing to me. I mean, it's such a faithful adaptation that I could basically follow it even if I wasn't fully engrossed in it at times when certain actors were on the screen. So, but it was a nice like time capsule moment to go back to. Like previously, the only Dune that had gone past the only Dune that's gone past the first book. So, and it is interesting to have that in my mind as we inevitably wait years for the third Denis movie. But yeah, I mean, it's on YouTube. So if anyone wants to check it out, I will say that one of the comments on the third episode was ridiculous. This was a monumental production of Herbert's dream. The special effects were not top drawer, but sufficient. The cast was excellent and the acting was superb. The storytelling was special. The more modern version of it has monumental special effects, but in my mind cannot match the flavor of this presentation. And I don't know what that man is smoking, but it must be pretty good. So not to bash someone else's opinion, but I have the very much opposite view of that.
Yeah.
No, there does seem to be a contingent that has sort of a hipsterish, stance toward this thing where they go, oh, this is the real thing for real Dune fans, not the. And I think Andrea has interacted with some of these people on Twitter. If memory serves.
I'm sorry,
I
Andrea.
have. No. I completely 100% agree with you. The interactions I had were people getting mad at me because I didn't like the book, Dune Messiah.
I see.
Those were the pushback I got from some real Dune heads who like sent me long DMs about like all the really, really intense details of the appendix and apocrypha of Dune. It's like, okay, dude.
What's interesting is I think you and I felt very similarly about that book, and I didn't get any of those comments, so I don't know why they particularly targeted you.
What could it be? I wonder what's different between you guys.
Yeah.
Well, but I think specifically the thing they latched onto that I said was that I said the book seemed like a first draft.
Oh, right.
There was one person, at least one person was like, how dare you say that? Or that's ridiculous. Or this is, I don't know. But I specifically remember that being mentioned as something somebody got a little worked up about.
I remember pretty distinctly somebody saying to you that that this was like the real Dune adaptation, these things. So,
no, I don't think specifically for this. Maybe you're right. I don't know. I just remember because they reached out to me specifically, like on Twitter or whatever. Yeah. I was like,
but so anyway, so not to get sidetracked, but there does seem to be a contingent that views this as this is the true adaptations, and the Villeneuve films are just like for the masses or whatever.
Well, there are also the people that like think the Lynch one is like superior. So
yeah. But so I mean, I don't want to I don't agree with that at all in any way, shape, or form. I don't want to give anyone the impression that they will enjoy this if they watch it based on my recommendation. But I think this is strictly for like hardcore Dune fans who have already read the books.
Yeah.
Well, I think what we've said is that being these are the most faithful adaptations for sure, but being faithful does not guarantee a good adaptation. And I think it actually works against it in the end.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So to my mind, this is not in any way a model for how to adapt this material. But I will say, to give John Harrison credit, to me, this is sort of like a transitional phase in geek culture where you used to have Hollywood directors who despised science fiction, and if they had a chance to direct it, would change everything and had no respect for the source material at all. And, I feel like this was obviously someone who respected the source material and wanted to stay faithful to it as much as possible, and just didn't do it in a great way. But I feel like that was a necessary phase to pass through to get to where we are now, where you have people who respect the material and have a artistic vision for how to make it entertaining, and appeal to a mainstream audience. So in that sense, I think this was an important, like again, a transitional fossil kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so Andrea, what are your final thoughts on?
Well, I like Raj. I binged it from this morning till about 20 minutes before we started recording. And when I first started, it was probably like 9:00 this morning, and I was like, oh, I can't believe I have to do this. It was very much felt like a chore. But as we got through episode 1 and then we went into Children of Dune, it was engaged. Like I was really gripped. I was really gripped by it. I can't say it's gripping, but I was really swept up in it. So, objectively, you have to look at that as, this is actually a pretty good production and a pretty good adaptation. We have gone over what the flaws are, some of the acting, some of the graphics. But overall, I think it was pretty good and not a complete, I wasn't bored and I wasn't angry and I wasn't yelling at the TV, which is something I do when I'm when I watch a really bad show. And if nothing else, I would watch it for James McAvoy's performance because he's fantastic. And you can see right here, and I think you're right. I think Matt, you said this is one of the first things he did. You can see why he became such a big actor. You can see it right here, even with the less than good script. It's a decent script, but it's not Villeneuve. So yeah, I think if you love Dune, this is definitely something you should watch. and just James McAvoy's amazing.
Yeah. James McAvoy is great, and Alia is very, very attractive. And so, on that note, I think we're going to wrap things up there. So, we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Rajan Khanna. So, thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
And that was our panel. So, big thanks again to Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Rajan Khanna for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.